What's good, YouTube? It's me, Scooter, back in another video. Today, I want to talk to you guys about a really fun deck that I've been experimenting with in my free time, and that deck is none other than a 20-year-old archetype called Ancient Dated Robots, who do a lot of damage. Yep, these guys are a very OTK trended deck. They typically want to go second, but they can also go first. And we happen to receive some new toys for them. And I figured out there's some really cool combos that you can actually do with this deck. So yeah, everyone was a little scared of Tenpai Dragons being the actual go second deck. Well, apparently there's another deck that's just as explosive. Now, fun fact, the Ancient Gears were actually used by an anime character in the original Yu-Gi-Oh! GX anime. Yep. Dr. Velian Crowler, who is actually an instructor at Duel Academy, and coincidentally, he's also a self-proclaimed
I have a PhD in dueling. I've earned the title doctor, thank you. I have a PhD in dueling! That takes 9 years in duel school, you know!
Anywho, let's just dive in to see what new support we actually got in Legacy of Destruction, because these cards are actually very nice for the engine. So the first card that we actually received in lead was none other than Ancient Gear Advance, a very powerful continuous spell card that depicts the Ancient Gears actually advancing in an army towards their opposition. This card says when this card is activated, add one Ancient Gear spell trap from your deck to your hand except Ancient Gear Advance, and then once per turn you can tribute a monster, draw one card, and apply this effect for the rest of the turn. You can normal summon one Ancient Gear Golem or level 5 or higher monster that mention it without tributing. And obviously you cannot set cards during the turn you activate this card. You can only activate one per turn. Now, why is this relevant? Because we clear our board, which allows us to actually make usage of Ancient Gear Catapult, an older support card that allows us to special summon an Ancient Gear monster from our deck while we control no monster. Newest means that we can pop Ancient Gear Advance with Ancient Gear Catapult and just be off to the races. So very awesome effect there. At the top, we actually have a retrain of Ancient Gear Golem, which the deck centers around. And this guy is named Ancient Gear Dark Golem, whose name becomes Ancient Gear Golem while he's on the field or in the graveyard. And if this card is summoned, you can actually add up to 2 cards, Ancient Gear cards or Gear Town, from your deck to your hand, except Ancient Gear Dark Golem, a restriction that most of the Ancient Gear monsters actually have. This is a hard once per turn, and it also has the other effect of Ancient Gear Golem that says if this card attacks, your opponent cannot activate spells and traps until the end of the damage step. Now, by reading this from a glance, this card is very powerful. You get an instant +2. Obviously, you have to discard a card. But first, we're adding 2 cards. We can choose to discard what we want to after the fact. And that is honestly just crazy in itself. As long as you're able to summon this guy to the board, you get 2 free Ancient Gear cards from your deck directly. It doesn't even have to be monsters. It can literally be cards. And it could also be Gear Town, which happens to be a non-Ancient Gear card. So a lot of the other cards cannot actually search this. But this is a core component of the engine because when Gear Town's destroyed, you can search your deck and special summon out any Ancient Gear monster. Now, to get past this setting restriction, you can actually set your cards before playing. So let's say you play Infinite Impermanence, you can still set that to start with your turn and then start playing after the fact. So it's kind of interesting how you can kind of bypass that restriction by doing things first, kind of out of order than you would normally do them. Up next is Ancient Gear Tanker, a level 4 monster that's actually Ancient Gear Soldier equipped with the Ancient Gear Tank, 2 very old cards, but you can see that he's actually in this tank and he's rolling around. This card says if it's normal or special summoned, you can summon 1 Ancient Gear monster from your hand, ignoring its summoning conditions, or better yet, if your opponent can something from the graveyard, not necessarily expending resources from her hand. It also has the additional effect 600 attack, but most importantly, this allows you to blow up some of your own cards, like Gear Town, for example, or Ancient Gear Fortress, and then just spam the board with a lot of Ancient Machines. We also have Ancient is not treated as the actual Ancient Gear Golem while in the deck. You can send 1 Ancient Gear Golem from your hand deck or face-up monster zone to the graveyard, and then immediately after this resolves, you normal summon an additional Ancient Gear monster from your hand in addition to your normal summon. Then the other effect is if you normal or special an Ancient Gear Golem, you can banish this card from your graveyard, place 1 Ancient Gear continuous trap from your hand directly face up on the field. This bypasses the restriction where we cannot actually set cards for the rest of the turn that the other Ancient Gear cards actually impose, which kind of counteracts the trap cards having to be set for a turn, right? So now you can just activate them from your hand. 67 of Yu-Gi-Oh! GX. When Ancient Gear Golem is actually attacking elemental hero Flare Neels and gets blocked by a Necro Gardener. So very cool callback to the anime here. Now this card has a very powerful effect. It says Ancient Gear Golem and monsters that mention it in your monster zone are unaffected by your opponent's activated monster effects. But better yet, if your opponent controls a monster, you can fusion summon 1 fusion monster that metas material, including an Ancient Gear Golem you control. And if you do this, it can attack up to 3 times during the battle phase, making it easy to OTK your opponent with big fusion monsters that we already have in the extra deck. By the way, guys, if you like this guide, we do have a Patreon. The link is in the description below, so check that out if you want to see more guides like this and a lot of cool tips and tricks for Yu-Gi-Oh! And competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! In general. So as you guys can see, the new support that we actually got in Legacy of Destruction is very, very awesome and a huge addition to the existing deck. Now, we are receiving 2 new support cards in the future as well. That's coming out in the OCG. One called Ancient Gear Dragon, who allows you to negate spell and trap cards. Very, very powerful effect there. And another called Ancient Gear Statue. That is a Lone Fire Blossom / Cyber Dragon, allowing you to special summon an Ancient Gear from your deck, ignoring its summoning conditions by tributing itself. This will probably come out maybe a year later because it's coming out in the OCG sometime in June or July in Animation Chronicle. But just really cool to see that there are more continuous support coming out on the horizon for this deck, so it's not. And we also have existing fusion spells like Ancient Gear Fusion, allow an array of fusion monsters. Ancient Gear Megaton Golem requires 3 Ancient Gear monsters and allows you to actually attack up to as many fusion monsters as you used for its summon, as long as you use 2 or more Ancient Gear Golems. So this is very, very easy to OTK your opponent. We have Chaos Ancient Gear Giant, a fusion monster that allows you to attack all of your opponent's monsters and deal piercing damage. Also, he's unaffected by spell trap effects. And better yet, he's actually a machine type that requires 4 Ancient Gear monsters. Ancient Gear Golem, who requires Ancient Gear Golem plus 2 Ancient Gear monsters. He can attack for a whopping 4,400. And, you know, when he gets to attack multiple times, if you summon him off something like Ancient Gear Duel, that can equally end the duel just as much as the other fusions. Approaching time in the real-life Yu-Gi-Oh! Because, you know, time is the thing that happens when you only have 45 minutes to play the match. So when you're in time, you can burn your opponent for 1,000, and you don't have to worry about this card getting hand-trapped because he's literally unaffected by other card effects. Now, support-wise, yes, there are a bunch of Ancient Gears. As we mentioned before, this is a 20-year-old archetype, and a lot of the older Ancient Gears are pretty useless. They just have some effects that are not very appealing. I mean, it doesn't really make any sense to increase our attack by 600 as an equipped spell, nor does it make any sense to tribute an Ancient Gear cannon, as they're probably not worth mentioning nor grazing over. Now, the cards that we do care about in the existing support is, for starters, Ancient Gear Box. This is a very, very powerful card that says if this card is added from your deck or graveyard to your hand except by drawing it, you can activate this effect, add 1 Earth Machine type monster with 500 attack and or defense from your deck to your hand, except Ancient Gear Box. And it just so happens that a lot of our Ancient Gears actually do have 500 attack or defense, ancient defense, so that can be added. There are also some other cool monsters outside of the archetype that have 500 attack and fit the build to be added. So this is a very, very nice card. It allows you to add an additional card when he's searched off of something like Ancient Gear Dark Golem, which means that you're effectively adding 3 cards instead of just 2. Ancient Gear Wyvern is also a very, very powerful support card for the Ancient Gears. This is a Stratos that allows you to add an Ancient Gear card from your deck to your hand when he's no more special summoned, except Ancient Gear Wyvern. And this card is very, very nice because you can search for any Ancient Gear card, which is just nuts, and it could be special summoned. So just very, very high impact. Definitely a great starter for the deck. We kind of talked about Ancient Gear Catapult. This allows you to special summon a monster from your deck, ignoring the summoning conditions by popping a face-up card you control, but you do have to control no monsters. It also has a graveyard-based effect where you can banish it to destroy a face-up card you control and special summon an Ancient Gear token, but bear note that you can only use 1 of this card's effects per turn and not both. Yeah, a lot of the older cards happen to have some crazy restrictions for whatever reason. I'm not sure why whoever designed the Ancient Gear cards, even though they were never meta relevant, for some reason had some very hefty restrictions anyways. Ancient Gear Frame allows you to discard a card to add an Ancient Gear Golem or a spell or trap card that specifically mentions Ancient Gear Golem from your deck to your hand and is searchable off of the Ancient Gear box. So just very, very nice synergy, potentially playing 1 to search for Ancient Gear Fusion, which is a fusion spell allowing us to fusion an Ancient Gear Fusion monster from the extra deck by using monsters from our hand or field as fusion material. If we use Ancient Gear Golem on the field as a fusion material, we can actually also use the rest of the materials from our deck directly. So this is very, very nice. We just get to basically Shaddoll Fusion and send as many resources as we want to summon out any of the 3 powerful Ancient Gear OTK fusion monsters. And then just probably 1 copy of the original Ancient Gear Golem for an honorable mention. We do have to run 1 copy of this guy to go with Ancient Gear Commander, who has to send as a cost the original Ancient Gear Golem from our deck, hand, or field to the graveyard, and then from there that allows you to start normal summoning and playing even more. Now, one of the Ancient Gear support sets, arguably one of the best cards in the entire series, is none other than Ancient Gear Fortress. This card actually makes your entire plethora of Ancient Gears into Red Eyes Dark Dragoons. Yep, you thought Sangen Summoning was bad? Well, wait till you read this card. This card says, during the turn that there were no more special summoned, your opponent cannot target Ancient Gear monsters you control with card effects. Also, they cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects, and best of all, your opponent cannot activate cards or effects in response to the activation of your Ancient Gear cards or effects, meaning they're not going to be able to Ash Blossom your Ancient Gear Fusion, they're not going to be able to Infinite Impermanence or Veiler any of your creatures, and you're probably going to swing for game as long as this sticks on board. Now, in the instance that this card is actually destroyed by card effect, whether that's by your own effect or your opponent's, you can special summon an Ancient Gear monster from your hand or your graveyard, so it does float into future bodies. Yeah, I have no idea why Ancient Gear Fortress is actually $25 to $30. I get it. It's only had one common printing. In the original Ancient Gear structure deck, which is like the reactor structure deck that happened to include this, we desperately need a reprint. So if you guys want to play Ancient Gears, this is the only card stopping it from being absolutely budget. Now, Urgent Schedule is one of those cards that is absolutely amazing in this deck. It's a quick play spell card that says if your opponent controls more monsters than you, special summon one level 4 or lower and one level 5 or higher Earth Machine monster from your deck in defense mode, but negate their effects. So this is really, really effective because it allows us to tutor for a Dark Golem, as well as a copy of Magical Hound, who can activate in the graveyard. So that's an additional resource we can use in the graveyard to bring back as a body. And then we can link off instantly to go off into Ancient Gear Ballista without using our normal summon and off of one card. And this card is surprisingly also an OTK in itself because Ballista searches for Gear Town. You can pop Gear Town, and then you can use the effect of Gear Town in your graveyard to special summon out Dark Golem and go off to the races. So this is a very, very powerful card, especially in a Go Second deck like this. So I went ahead and took some ideas from Twitter. There were actually 2 Ancient Gear players who played this deck for the YCS Japan, the recent YCS that had over 8,000 players. The first one was none other than Ronan Mendes on Twitter, who went to a 3-2 record before getting knocked out of the tournament. This was a double elimination tournament, but he did relatively well with the deck. This was a Go Second OTK style deck that went to board wipe his opponent and then go for game. The second one was from the user TrueOde0403, who went as far as round 6 with a 4-2 finish using a similar style of OTK. The Go Second Ancient Gear, you can see there are a lot of Go Second cards, and it's just very, very powerful when you are actually able to combo off and just kill your opponent. But he also used some cool stuff that we don't have in the TCG, like the Mecha Phantom Beast Allion, who allows you to generate a bunch of synchro plays. But still, I took inspiration for the actual OTK potential of this deck and decided to build a Go Second version. So the deck does want to go second and play a bunch of powerful board breakers like Forbidden Droplets, Lightning Storm, Harpy's Feather Duster, and just push through your plays. This is a little bit volatile in the Snake Eyes matchup where they're still going for the Omega Hand Rip Dispatter where they rip 2 cards out of your hand, but I still think it's really, really neat to see. And also the fact that Engage is now at 3. I realize there's something here that you guys could potentially experiment with because Hornet Drones can actually go off into Sky Striker Kaina, who is an Earth Machine in herself, allowing you to go off and link climb into a lot of things like your Ancient Gear Ballista, for example. So there's definitely something here, and when you play a lot of spells in a deck like this, maybe you guys can find a way to actually integrate the Sky Striker engine. This is something that came to my mind, but I didn't get a chance to test it, so I don't know how effective it actually is. This would also allow you to play things like Widow Anchor and also Afterburners, all cards that you specifically want to have going second, and alongside 3 copies of Engage, you're probably going to be drawing a lot of powerful cards. All right, now to get to the meat and potatoes. How the heck do we actually OTK our opponent going second? Well, you can do it for as little as 1 single card going second. Here's how. We're going to activate Ancient Gear Advance. This is the main starter of a lot of our combos. Add a copy of Ancient Gear Catapult, activate Catapult, target the Advance, summon out the Gear Dark Golem, effect to add 2 cards. As you guys already know, this is the awesome combo that gives you just free cards. Add a copy of Ancient Gear Box alongside another Ancient Gear monster. It could be Wyvern, could be whatever. Just need it in the graveyard for fusion material later on. Discard that, trigger Box on a new chain, activate and add a copy of Ancient Gear Commander. We're going to normal summon because we haven't normaled yet. Use the effect of Foolish, the Ancient Gear Golem as a cost. Normal summon out the Gearbox. Now we can link off the commander and the Gearbox to go into our Ancient Gear Ballista. Now bear in mind we're going second, so our opponent typically would control a monster. Now if they do not control a monster, we can still OTK them the good old-fashioned way. We would just do this slightly different by normal summoning the Golem out and then getting the Gear Golem out from our graveyard, and then that's still over 8k. But let's say they have a monster, we can use Gear Ballista to add a copy of either Gear Town, or it could also be Ancient Gear Fortress, provided we search for Wyvern. This is the exact same thing, but in this case, we'll go for Gear Town. We'll use Ballista's secondary ability that changes our opponent's attack and defense to 0 by targeting the Gear Town to pop, and then Gear Town's effect will trigger, allowing us to special summon out Ancient Gear Wyvern, who can then add a copy of Ancient Gear Duel to our hand. Now, you can also get a little fancy and activate and add a copy of Ancient Gear Fusion if you want to go that route. Let's say if your opponent has a bunch of defense mode monsters that we can just go for game with Chaos Ancient Gear Giant. But in this case, let's say they only have 1 monster. We search for Duel. We activate the in-graveyard effect of Commander. banish itself to place Duel on the field. And then Duel can now activate because our opponent controls a monster to fusion summon by banishing cards we control, including an Ancient Gear Golem and cards from our graveyard. So now we go out for the Ancient Gear Ultimate Golem. Now, specifically this one, because the other two, Chaos Ancient Gear Golem is actually unaffected by trap effects, so he cannot attack 3 times. Ancient Gear Duel allows this fusion monster to attack 3 times directly, so Ultimate Ancient Gear Golem will actually be allowed to do that, and it has the most attack. That also does piercing damage, so we're going to pierce at least 4,400 over that one monster that got 0 defense from Gear Towns being destroyed by Ancient Gear Ballista, and then he's going to attack an additional 2 times after that. So 3 times in total, that's over 14,000 damage, right? This is a lot of damage, guys. So off of one card, you have a lot of options. And of course, it's not restricted to just activating, you know, like the Tempai Field Spell and the Tempais where you get stopped, you're kind of in a bad spot. This deck is more combo heavy, so you have a lot more toys to play with. In the rest of your hand, you have 4 other cards that could be board breakers or extenders, so you can continue and try to do this combo, or even do something more devastating by link climbing, something like an Access Code or whatever, because you're not actually locked into anything unless you actually pop in Ancient Gear Fortress. But of course, popping Gear Town in this combo bypasses that entirely. So if you guys are probably wondering, now what happens if our opponent makes us go first? This is a go second deck, but our opponent's gonna be like, all right, you start. Well, there are a couple of cool things you can actually do. So off of 1 Ancient Gear Advance and 1 discard, here is the board that you can actually make. We're going to start off by activating Ancient Gear Advance. Now, Ancient Gear Advance is a lot better than actually opening Wyvern because you don't burn your normal summon as your starting play. And we actually require a normal summon to make the bigger plays later on, and I'll show you guys why. We're going to add Catapult, activate Catapult, target the Advance to pop and special summon out Ancient Gear Dark Golem from our deck. Use the effect as you special summon. We can add 2 Ancient Gear cards and discard a card. So, add Ancient Gear Tanker and Ancient Gear Box, discarding Droplet or whatever other card you have to discard. Activate the effect of Gearbox on a new chain. It's important that we do not ditch the Ancient Gear Box, because if you discard it, then it's not going to be in your hand, so it cannot actually activate. But because we left it in our hand, we can add Ancient Gear Commander. So here's why your normal summon is important, because you're going to be able to normal summon out the Ancient Gear Commander, use the effect to, as a cost, Foolish Ancient Gear Golem. Then we can normal summon Ancient Gear Tanker as an additional normal, use the effect to special summon out Ancient Gear Box, because we're going first, our opponent has no monsters. Then we can link off these 2 monsters, the Ancient Gear Dark Golem and the Ancient Gear Box, into Ballista. Ballista's effect allows us to add a copy of Gear Town. Gear Town will be placed onto the field, and this is important that we use the effect of Gear Tanker to pop it. Now, Gear Town does not actually miss timing here, because all of the Ancient Gear cards are luckily worded in a way where the summon happens at the same time as the actual destruction. So now, this will not miss timing. This is important to note with Gear Town. It misses timing a lot because it's an older card. But the Ancient Gear cards actually do destroy and then apply the additional effect at the same timing. So Ancient Gear Town will be able to activate and resolve, special summoning out another copy of Dark Golem. Because we summoned out Ancient Gear Golem, we can now use Gear Commander to summon out an Ancient Gear Golem from our graveyard. And now from here we have options. We can obviously overlay into rank 8s. We can Xyz and link climb. You know, there's a lot of different things you can do. I'm going to go into Sargus here, use the effect to add a copy of Therion King Regulus, and then Regulus can actually attach the copy of a monster that we have in our grave. So that's our first Omni Negate. We can overlay for a rank 4 here, something like Abyss Dweller if you want to lock down your opponent for the turn. Say you're playing against Fire Kings or maybe Snake Eye. And then we, on our opponent's turn, can use the effect of Dweller. While they control a card, you can actually use the effect of Sargus to bounce something on the field, whether that's our opponent's card, or you can bounce back the card equipped to Regulus for follow-up. So that's technically 2 disruptions. You have Abyss Dweller, and then of course you have the Sargus effect, and then you have Regulus, which is the 3rd disruption. Now, alternatively, if we backtrack, we can actually make a different board as well. So what we can actually do here, instead of overlaying for Dweller, is we can just go into a 3 negate Appaloosa. So that's something else you can do. And again, all of this is off of 1 card and 1 discard. So it's kind of cool. You have a lot of options if you're going first. It's not necessarily like you're passing on a Hieratic Seal like you might in Tempais. So here's another cool play that we can actually do off of just the Ancient Gear Advance. You're going to go Ancient Gear Advance effect to place add Catapult, activate Catapult, place Ancient Gear Wyvern on the field. Effect's going to add a copy of Gearbox. Gearbox will trigger, allowing us to actually add a non-Ancient Gear monster, but Magical Hound. This card allows you to special summon it from your hand by targeting a face-up Spiral Trap your opponent controls and returning it to the hand. From your hand or graveyard, you can activate this effect. So it's very, very good against a lot of the field spell decks that are in the format right now, or against Floodgate-based decks. You get rid of the Floodgate, you special summon out Hound, and he's a level 1 tuner. But in this combo, because we're going first, what we can actually do is normal summon him just as a tuner and use an Earth Tuner plus a Earth Machine type to make Naturia Beast, which requires an Earth Tuner and a non-tuner Earth monster. So this is just a one-card Naturia Beast, and obviously we would require ways to protect Naturia Beast because a naked Naturia Beast is just no good. You want to protect it from being destroyed by card effects or by battle. So as long as you have another way to complement Naturia Beast, which is one of the most powerful Floodgate Omni-Negate monsters in the format right now, it shuts down spells forever. And the fact that, you know, a lot of players are playing field spells, board breakers, whatever the heck else, this is a great counter to that. Now, just know that this can actually be popped by Ghost Ogre. He does have to remain on the field to resolve the effect. So that's one thing you have to definitely look at, maybe pairing it with something like an Appaloosa just to protect it and make sure that it does not get destroyed by a Ghost Ogre. So this is sort of a deck example I came up with for the actual theory with the deck, you know, just maxing out on the cards that count, Ancient Gear Wyvern, 2 copies of the Dark Golem, and then everything else is just a lone copy. You don't really need these cards. I think it's better to play minimized versions of them and actually focus on drawing our power spells as well as the board breakers to be able to fire off the Ancient Gear Catapult and then start playing from there. But that being said, drawing multiples is always a way to just play with extenders. You know, if you open Gear Town plus like Catapult or Advance, you're able to pop the Gear Town and summon out 2 monsters. So a lot of great perks there. I do think you need the Commander plus the Gear Golem just to get to the access to the Gear Duel to have that OTK line. And obviously, Magical Hound, we talked about. This card allows you to return a face-up spell or trap your opponent controls. Everyone's playing field spells nowadays, or like Snake Eyes, they have stuff in their spell and trap. You can bounce it back, summon out Magical Hound, and you get like 2 for 1. This is a tuner, of course, to make Naturia Beast, and otherwise, it's just an Earth Machine extender that has 500 attack, can be searched off of Ancient Gear box as well. So just a lot of synergy there for Ghost second deck. You don't necessarily need the Regulus, but I thought it was kind of cool that you could have that option going first. It is a bit of a brick, though, one thing to consider. And then the rest is fairly standard. Fortress is just amazing card, being able to be basically turn your monsters into Red Eyes Dark Dragoon, and then also they cannot respond to your activations. So you can do so many cool things just on the summon. Obviously, all of our trigger effects, you're not going to be able to respond to that either, so they're not responding to the summon period. It's almost like a Branded and Lost, like rolled in one with like a bunch of other shenanigans. If it gets popped, we can revive like an Ancient Gear from our graveyard. 2 Gear Town, I think that's more than enough. Bear in mind that this does miss timing. It's an older card that says when this card is destroyed and sent in the graveyard, you can special summon an Ancient Gear. So if this is destroyed on Chain Link 2 or higher, or by any effect that says destroyed then, X yada yada, then you're not going to be able to special summon. 1 Ancient Gear Fusion, you can search it for the OTK. I think Droplet's pretty standard. Lightning Storm, Hebri's Feather Zester, Call By, probably maybe not needed, honestly. You know, you can experiment. I just put some board breakers. I thought Thrust was kind of interesting because you can search a lot of starters like your Ancient Gear Catapult, but you can also search for Power Bond, which is a potential option. Double the attack of one of these fusions and just swing for game. Another thing you can kind of experiment with. Urgent Schedule is obviously an OTK on its own, and it's just an insane extender that puts Magical Hound in the graveyard, but also gives you a free Ancient Gear Ballista without using your normal summon. So just amazing card there. And yeah, extra deck's fairly standard. 1 of each fusion. Naturia Beast. You can play some rank 4 toolboxes. You can play Sargus to search for Therion King, and then you can also play Baguska. Dagaris is really nice for a lot of the OTKs because you can resurrect one of your monsters or double the attack of one of your monsters, so do like huge damage with Chaos Ancient Gear Giant. Typhon standard, 1 copy of Ballista. You maybe could bump it to 2. Platinum Gadget is another tool. You can actually special summon a monster from your hand. Just note you can't link summon with this guy, so that's another thing to be aware of. And then Appaloosa, IP Masquerena, and SP, pretty standard if your opponent makes you go first. Access Code is another option as well, because you do have enough bodies sometimes to go to this for the additional OTK plus pop. You have Springen's Merrymaker to rank up into the Therion if you have just 2 level 4s. This is a cool card. Heavy Armored Train Iron Wolf. It allows you to actually detach a card to target a machine monster you control, and that monster can attack directly this turn. So this is just another way to like boost a huge Chaos Ancient Gear Giant or something that can attack multiple times and just like swing for game. So a lot of cool things you can actually interact with there. There are a lot of cool rank 4s. You can play Gear Gaiden X as well to be able to search for something like an Ancient Gear box. Let's say if your Dark Golem didn't resolve. And there's actually a number 90 Galaxy Eyes Fulton Lord. It's a generic rank 8 Xyz that allows you to search for Curry Fulton, who you can pay 2,000 life points and you don't take any damage for that turn during your opponent's turn. So against Tenpai Dragons, this is very effective because you can use it in main phase. So before they're able to summon out the Sangenpai Transcendent Dragon and lock you out of using effects in the battle phase, this is a battle fader that you can preemptively shotgun in the main phase and it's searchable, so that's just a way to survive against the Tenpai deck, let's say if they make you go first. So that's about it for the Ancient Gears. What do you guys think about this? Let me know in the comments below if you have any suggestions or any other ways to play this deck. This is just my iteration from whipping it up really quickly, looking at Twitter posts and what they're doing in the OCG. I think this deck is a lot of fun, guys. Give it a try. It is really, really fun. Let me know what you think. Smash that like button, subscribe. Other than that, we'll see you guys next video. Thanks a lot for tuning in. Bye-bye.